Something really interesting is happening in the Neovim world. A very prominent figure in the programming community has decided to switch to Neovim from his last text editor. Now, who is this figure, you ask? Well, none other than DHH himself. That's right, the handsome race car driving creator of Ruby on Rails has decided that he wants to ditch TextMate and move on to something different, preferably Neovim. Now, I know it's fashionable to kind of hate on Ruby on Rails lately and to also kind of hate on DHH and a lot of his opinions, but personally I find myself agreeing with a lot of his opinions, and I'm a Ruby on Rails stan. I love it. I started my career with it and I'm still using it to this day. But all of that's beside the point, because DHH wrote an article about his thoughts on switching from TextMate to something like Neovim.
I guess you could say things are getting pretty serious.
And it's really good. It's actually very interesting, and I think he makes a lot of really interesting points that I want to discuss with you guys as friends. So let's dive right in. So here's the post. It's called Finding the Last Editor, and it starts off like this. Some programmers can code under any conditions. Open Office, they'll bring headphones. Whatever editor is on their system, they'll make it work. Using a different framework or language every few years, no problem. I envy that level of versatility, but I've come to accept it just isn't me. I bond with a quiet room, an editor, and a programming environment far more deeply than that. Does that sound familiar to you? It does to me. Case in point, I've been using TextMate since 2004. It's been about 20 years now. TextMate has seen its popularity come and go in that time, and today few people are still choosing it. And then he goes on for a little while to talk about why he likes TextMate, the macro recording, the font, the theme, all that stuff. I mean, it is really cool, and it's also very nostalgic. Like I said, I got my start with programming in Ruby on Rails. That was the thing that jump-started my career. DHH had that famous video, create a blog in Rails in 15 minutes. It was really funny. He said oops a lot, but he used TextMate in that video, and he did something amazing. He created a fully functioning blog using a framework for the web in 15 minutes. It was unbelievable. I watched it probably thousands of times, and that's literally what got me into programming in the first place. So TextMate is very nostalgic, but not something I use anymore either. But now this is where it really makes a very interesting point. It's not much, because I'm not looking for an IDE. I want to write my code in a plain text editor and let that constraint force me to design programs and frameworks that require nothing more. Now that right there to me is an amazing statement. That really shows his mindset for writing code, and I agree with it full stop. It's amazing how sensitive you become to extraneous elements when you literally have to type all of them by hand. It's surely one of the reasons I never got on with explicitly typed languages, which is basically require an IDE to flow. Now I fully agree with this statement. Basically, what Neovim gives me is a very intimate look at all of the tools I'm using for my job. The editor, all the CLI tools, all the servers I'm running. I know what's going on in my environment at all times, because that's just how Neovim kind of works, in the terminal at least. And I truly believe in keeping code simple. There's a great quote by Alan Kay, who is a creator of Smalltalk, and I think the creator of OOP as we know it. And he basically said this: simple things should be simple, and complex things should be possible. And that's kind of been a guiding light for me throughout my whole entire career. I always go with the simplest solutions. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people over-engineer solutions to really simple problems that don't need complex solutions. And even in the web development world as a whole, we over-engineer stuff all the freaking time. I mean, just think about the JavaScript frameworks these days, right? You have Next.js that has server-rendered components, it has special caching, it has all these special components for images, all this crazy stuff going on. You have TypeScript, which is basically something that's on top of JavaScript. Everything gets transpiled to run on the browser, which is dynamic in and of itself because everyone's computer is different, everyone's browser version is different, and things get transpiled and then untranspiled so that you can debug things while they're running in the browser. It's all kind of crazy, and it's extremely over-engineered. And I think that this is part of the reason why certain libraries like HTMX are starting to show up and kind of rock the boat a little bit, is because I think people have been using these JavaScript frameworks for a while, and then they kind of look over and see HTMX and go, oh, we could do it like that? We could do it that easily? And it's true, it doesn't have to be that hard. That's why I love Rails. That's why I love full stack frameworks like Elixir and Phoenix, Python and Django, Ruby on Rails, Go, and whatever Go has. I think the API should have your business logic and the front end should be simple. And I think we kind of lost our way there. So it's interesting he points out that he wants his editor to be simple so that it forces him to write simple code. It's very smart. Then he goes on to talk about climbing free solo, which I can't relate to. I can't move this body up a big rock, kidding me? And then he talked about TextMate for a little bit. He tried a few different editors, but it didn't really work out to him. And then there's another thing that he writes here that I think is also really interesting. But here's the problem. TextMate is tied to the Mac, and tying myself to the Mac seems like an increasingly bad idea. Apple has turned into the kind of company that I just don't want to have to rely on. Now, this much is true. Ever since Apple started soldering the memory cards into the motherboards, they started to lose me a little bit. I still use Macs because it's just the thing that everyone seems to use. My company gave me a new Mac. I use a Mac for editing, whatever. But there is something to be said about having a text editor or having any kind of program that can travel with you from system to system. Neovim's perfect. You can run it on the Mac, you can run it on Linux, and you can run it on Windows with WSL. It really is very versatile and it'll live wherever you want to go. He goes on to say that doesn't mean I can't use any of their products, but I absolutely do not want to feel like I have to. I want to have the independence where walking away is always an option, and it just isn't as long as I'm committed to TextMate. Thus began the search for the last editor, one that isn't tied to a specific platform or preferably even a specific company, and that I trust will still be around until I'm done programming. How long's Vim been around? Little while. VS Code has become the obvious choice for most of the web world, but the longer I spend working with it, the more I realize that its heart is beating to become a full-fledged IDE, and all I want is a text editor, like he said above. There's another thing about VS Code that I want to sort of run on a tangent with here. Every time I use it on a large project, it feels like I'm kind of typing through mud. There's something about VS Code and the way it loads things and the way it does IntelliSense and all this stuff. It's just not that fast. I find that IDEs like WebStorm and RubyMine are much faster than VS Code. I'm not sure what it is with VS Code, but it never felt very fast to me. It always kind of felt like it slowed me down. I don't know how to explain it. He also doesn't like that VS Code is tied to Microsoft. And he says, who knows what kind of villainy they may once again descent into if you hope to still be writing code for another 20 or 30 years. Really thinking long term here. The other suggestion I've heard a lot is Sublime. They have clients on macOS, Windows, and Linux, and I hear a lot of good things about it. It's the spiritual successor to TextMate, which is true 15 years ago. The last time I gave it a shot, it felt like an uncanny valley, very similar to TextMate, but not quite. And all the little differences added up to a shimmer I just couldn't shake. That's why I'm thinking it might be better to try something radically different. Enter Vim.
Boom shakalaka!
It's part of the ultimate neckbeard duo of editors together with Emacs. Hey, neckbeards, he's talking about us. It's an editor with a history that traces back to the 70s, and it's iconically quirky. The long-running joke is that nobody knows how to even quit it when they first start.
It's not true.
No, the command is :Q, by the way. But talk about standing the test of time. Now, the modern interpretation of Vim is called Neovim. Hell yes. And it's got a cult following, including people whose parents weren't even born when VI originally came about. Not me, but maybe some of you. It's still VI, it's still :Q to quit, it's still quirky, but it's also fast, modern, and integrates with the latest editor evolutions like language servers. This is very true, and it's especially true about Neovim because Neovim has a Lua runtime built into it. I personally believe that Lua runtime is what has led to this explosion of plugins and all these great features in Neovim that we're seeing today. Now, don't get me wrong, Vim was great, but it had nowhere near the amount of features, plugins, and development that Neovim has today. It just was not the same. I actually spent a summer programming in Vim prior to learning Ruby, and remarkably, a good portion of all those quirky commands have stuck in my brain. They don't leave, partly because the magic of Vim is its ubiquity. Every Linux system has some version of it installed, so whenever I'm editing files on a remote system, it's with VI mode. So we'll see. I'm still of two minds of whether I'm going to allow Apple's villainy separate me from my beloved TextMate, but I'm willing to experiment and entertain the option now. Let's go, Neovim. Show me what you've got. Ooh. I have goosebumps. Oh man, that's so cool. Now I really wanted to show you this article because it touches on a lot of really interesting topics and makes a lot of interesting points. A lot of points that really have driven me to Neovim to begin with. It can be as simple as you want it. It can be as complex as you want it. You can spend as much time as you want messing around with plugins or not, it doesn't matter. But Neovim will always be Vim. It will exist everywhere. It'll always have the same hotkeys and you'll always be able to find your way around as long as you know them. I for one am excited and I look forward to seeing videos of DHH using Neovim. I think it's going to be fun. And if you want to learn how to use Neovim and you want to learn how to configure your Neovim to look amazing, check out this playlist next, where I go over from zero to IDE in Neovim from scratch with Lua. It's pretty cool. And hey, thanks nerds.